Thank you. I'd like to ask a question about democracy in ancient Athens, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
In particular, is anything more known about the system of accountability? And when you talk about there being jurors and so on and sitting every other day, was the exposure of those accused a financial exposure? Was it personal liberty? Were their lives at stake?
Yeah.
Is much known about how that worked?
Absolutely. It's growth industry, a cottage industry. Among scholars of the ancient world, there is a very specific focus on Athenian judicial procedure and practice and theory, because we have 150, 200 speeches. Now, are they what was actually said? Probably not, but they reflect what was actually said, and therefore you can to some extent think back to what it would have been like to hear somebody say that. Unfortunately, in only 2 cases do we have both sides of a particular argument, and it's quite interesting that the arguments don't always, as it were, meet each other. So in other words, somebody will say, well, my opponent claimed such and such, and then you look for where the opponent allegedly claimed so, and it's not there. So maybe it was in the original, taken out of the published version. Anyway, on the basis of this, we can build up quite a detailed picture of the nature of jurisdiction and the justice system. We can write systematic works. What was the legal code is a bit strong because that implies unification, but some sort of pattern of all the laws on a particular type of offence, for example, impiety. There are grave distinctions to be drawn between what we would count as valid evidence, rules of procedure, relevance, but the key distinction is we have judges. They were all judges as well as jurors. They did not have judges. So there's no interpretation. And the issue, if it's a public trial, that is a trial affecting the good of Athens, not just the particular defendant and prosecution, then the issue would be mainly, in what way is it to the advantage of the city if we either condemn or acquit this person? So it's not always the case that what we would call equity was the predominant consideration, or that equity was served. It would be justice for the people. You've probably heard the term people's courts. Well, that's a kind of similar mentality to the ancient Athenian. We know most about the Athenian system. But let me just give you one illustration of accountability, which is what you started from. Thucydides, who was not, he was an elite intellectual. He wasn't a wild pro-democrat, shall we put it that way. But he loved Pericles, and he thought as long as Pericles was in charge, as long, in other words, as the people voted for what Pericles advised, Athens was in a good place. And he went to such an extent, he said, really, though Athens is a democratia in its name, actually, Pericles rules, archi, of the first citizen. However, he's very honest, he then goes on to say, but people got very disappointed with the policy that Pericles proposed and the means of implementing it. At the beginning of this, what's like a world war, Athens was doing very badly. The plague came. People blamed Pericles. Not only did they blame him, somebody, we don't know who, prosecuted him before a people's court. He was found guilty, deposed, and fined. Well, if that's what being an uncrowned king of Athens is, it's not much in the way of regal power. What Thucydides then goes on to say is, but next time the elections came around for the top office, and they had elections for the top offices, financial and military, the people voted Pericles back in, and he adds, as the masses tend to do, So in other words, what he didn't like about democracy was its, he thought, prejudice, emotion, ignorance, and in particular fickleness. But if you're a Democrat, what you like is that even Pericles is subject to you, not that you are subject to him.